The coin purse felt lighter than a feather when Beatrice Gardner appended it over her palm, and 3 copper pennies tumbled out with a pitiful clink that seemed to echo the hollowness in her stomach. She had been in Leadville, Colorado for 6 months now, ever since the mining boom had drawn desperate souls from every corner of the country in 1879. And she had learned quickly that survival meant swallowing pride and finding whatever work a woman alone could manage. The flowers she gathered each morning from the mountain meadows outside town were the only honest trade she knew, their bright petals a splash of beauty against the dust and grime of the mining settlement that clung to the side of the Rocky Mountains like a stubborn weed. Beatrice arranged the last bunch of Indian paintbrush and columbine on the wooden crate she used as a display, her fingers trembling slightly from the morning cold. September in the Colorado mountains brought an early chill that cut through her thin cotton dress, the same dress she had been wearing when she fled Kansas after her father's debts had left her with nothing but the clothes on her back and a heart full of determination to make something of herself. She was 20 years old, though sometimes she felt ancient, worn down by the constant worry of where her next meal would come from. Flowers, fresh mountain flowers. She called out, her voice carrying across the muddy main street where miners trudged past, their faces blackened with soot, their eyes fixed on the saloons and gambling halls that promised temporary escape from the brutal work of extracting silver from the mountain's depths. Most men ignored her completely. A few spared her pitying glances. One elderly gentleman with kind eyes bought a small bundle for 50 cents, which she accepted with genuine gratitude that brought tears to her eyes. But as the sun climbed higher and the morning wore on, her crate remained mostly full, and the gnawing anxiety in her chest grew heavier. That was when she saw him. He rode into town on a bay stallion that looked well cared for despite the trail dust coating its flanks. The man himself sat tall in the saddle, his broad shoulders squared beneath a worn leather vest, a tan hat pulled low over his eyes. Even from a distance, Beatrice could see he was different from the desperate prospectors who made up most of Leadville's population. There was something steady about him, something solid in the way he moved as he dismounted and tied his horse to the hitching post outside the general store. She watched as he stretched, rolling his shoulders back, and when he removed his hat to wipe his brow, she caught sight of dark hair and a strong profile that made her breath catch unexpectedly. Then his eyes swept the street and landed on her, and for a moment they simply looked at each other across the distance of rutted mud and wooden planks. He replaced his hat and walked toward her with purposeful strides, his boots squelching slightly in the muck. As he drew closer, Beatrice could see he was perhaps 25, with eyes the color of storm clouds and a face weathered by sun and wind but handsome in a rugged way that made her heart beat faster despite her better judgment. "Madam," he said, tipping his hat with old-fashioned courtesy that seemed out of place in this rough mining town. His voice was deep and warm, with a hint of something southern in the vowels. "Sir," Beatrice replied, straightening her spine and trying to look more confident than she felt. "Would you like to buy some flowers? They're fresh picked this morning and I can offer you a fair price." He looked down at her display, his expression unreadable. Then he surprised her by crouching down to examine the flowers more closely, his movements careful and deliberate. He touched one of the columbine blossoms gently, almost reverently. "These are beautiful," he said quietly. "My mother used to grow flowers like these back in Tennessee. She said they reminded her that there was still goodness in the world, even when times were hard." The past tense did not escape Beatrice's notice. "She had wisdom, your mother. That she did." He stood up, towering over her by more than a head, How much for all of them? Beatrice blinked. I'm sorry, all of them. Every flower you have here, how much would that be? Her mind raced, trying to calculate. She had perhaps 20 bundles, and she usually charged between 50 cents and $1 depending on the size. That would be about $15, sir. It was an enormous sum, more than she had seen in weeks. She expected him to balk, to laugh, to walk away. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a leather wallet, extracting a $20 gold piece that glinted in the sunlight. Here, he said, holding it out to her. For the flowers and for your trouble. Beatrice stared at the coin, her heart pounding. Sir, I don't have change for that, and that's more than the flowers are worth. I know what they're worth, he said gently, and I know what it looks like when someone is barely scraping by. Please take it. Pride warred with desperation in her chest. Pride lost. With shaking hands, she accepted the gold piece, closing her fingers around it tightly as if it might vanish like smoke. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you so much. He nodded and began gathering the flowers, his large hands surprisingly gentle with the delicate stems. When he had collected them all into his arms, looking slightly ridiculous with the colorful burden, he paused and looked at her with an expression she could not quite read. What's your name? He asked. Beatrice Gardner. Isaiah Zimmerman, he said. Most folks call me Isaiah or just Zim. Miss Gardner, I need to ask you something, and I hope you won't take offense. Her guard went up immediately. What is it? Why are you out here selling flowers in a place like this? You don't belong in Leadville. The observation stung, perhaps because it was true. I belong wherever I can survive, Mr. Zimmerman. This is an honest living. I didn't mean it as an insult, he said quickly. I just meant that a woman like you deserves better than scraping by in a mining camp where every day is a struggle just to eat. I've been through this town before, and I've seen what happens to women who run out of options. Beatrice felt heat rise to her cheeks. I am not desperate enough for that, sir, if that's what you're implying. That's not what I meant at all. He shifted the flowers in his arms. Miss Gardner, I run a cattle ranch about 10 miles south of here near Granite. It's a decent spread, and I've been needing help with the household work. My last housekeeper got married and moved to Denver with her husband 3 months ago, and the place has been falling apart ever since. I'm offering you a job if you'll take it. Room and board, plus $30 a month. Beatrice's mouth fell open. $30 a month was more than many miners made, and infinitely more than she was earning selling flowers. But accepting meant going off alone with a man she did not know, to a ranch miles from town where no one would hear her if she called for help. Isaiah must have read her expression because he quickly added, I understand your hesitation. You don't know me, and you'd be right to be cautious. Here's what I propose. Come out to the ranch today just to see it. I'll bring you back to town tonight if you decide you don't want the position. No obligations, no expectations beyond that. You can ask anyone in town about me. I've been running cattle in these parts for 3 years, and I've got a reputation as an honest man. Why? Beatrice asked. Why would you make such an offer to a stranger? He was quiet for a moment, his gray eyes distant. Because 6 months ago, I watched a woman collapse from hunger right there in front of the general store. She'd been trying to make it on her own, too proud to ask for help until it was almost too late. Reminded me of my sister back home, and how I wasn't there when she needed help. I swore then that if I ever had the chance to offer someone a decent opportunity, I would. The sincerity in his voice touched something deep in Beatrice's chest. She looked down at the gold piece in her hand, then at the empty crate that represented hours of walking through mountain meadows, hours of standing in the cold hoping someone would spare a few coins. She thought about the tiny room she rented above the laundry, where she could hear rats scratching in the walls at night, and where the landlord looked at her with increasingly predatory interest every time she was late with the rent. "All right," she said, surprising herself. "I'll come see your ranch, but I want to tell someone in town where I'm going and I'll need to collect my belongings." Relief washed over Isaiah's face. "Of course. Take all the time you need. I'll wait here with my horse, and Miss Gardner, thank you for trusting me." An hour later, Beatrice sat beside Isaiah on the bench seat of a sturdy wagon, her few possessions packed in a small trunk behind her. She had told Mrs. Henderson at the boarding house where she was going, and the older woman had nodded approvingly when Beatrice mentioned Isaiah's name. "I know that young man," Mrs. Henderson had said. "He's one of the good ones, keeps his word, pays his debts, doesn't drink to excess or gamble away his earnings. You could do worse than working for him." Now, as the wagon rattled along the rutted road leading south from Leadville, Beatrice studied Isaiah from the corner of her eye. His profile was strong, with a straight nose and a firm jaw covered in a few days' worth of dark stubble. His hands on the reins were capable and sure, and he handled the horses with the ease of long practice. "How did you come to Colorado?" she asked, partly from genuine curiosity and partly to fill the silence that stretched between them. "Came out from Tennessee after the war," he said. "I was too young to fight myself, but my father and older brother went. Neither of them came back, left my mother, my little sister, and me to manage the farm on our own." "I'm sorry," Beatrice said softly. Isaiah nodded. "We tried to keep the place going, but the war had destroyed so much. We lost everything eventually. My mother passed from fever when I was 18, and my sister went to live with our aunt in Nashville. I decided to head west, try to make something of myself. Worked as a ranch hand for a couple of years in Kansas, saved every penny, then heard about the opportunities out here in Colorado. Bought my land 3 years ago with everything I had. You raise cattle and horses both. It's hard work, especially doing most of it alone, but it's mine. That means something." He glanced at her. "What about you? How did you end up in Leadville?" Beatrice hesitated, then decided honesty was warranted since he had been forthcoming with her. "My father was a farmer in Kansas. Good man, but not good with money. He took loans he couldn't repay, made investments that didn't pan out. When he died last year, the bank took everything. I had no family left, no prospects. I heard there were opportunities in the mining towns, so I made my way here." "Must have taken courage," Isaiah observed. "Or desperation," Beatrice replied with a sad smile. "Sometimes it's hard to tell the difference." They rode in companionable silence for a while, the wagon wheels creaking rhythmically and the horses' hooves clopping steadily. The road climbed through stands of aspen that shimmered gold in the September sunlight, their leaves already turning with the approach of autumn. The Rocky Mountains rose majestically around them, their peaks still dusted with snow from an early storm the previous week. Despite her lingering apprehension, Beatrice found herself relaxing slightly. There was something peaceful about the journey, something that felt almost like hope stirring in her chest. "There," Isaiah said, pointing ahead as they crested a rise. "That's the ranch." The house sat in a valley between two ridges, a solid log structure with a covered porch and real glass in the windows. Behind it stood a barn that looked well maintained, and beyond that, Beatrice could see fenced pastures where cattle grazed peacefully. Smoke curled from the chimney, and the whole scene had an air of permanence and stability that made her throat tighten unexpectedly. "It's beautiful," she said honestly. "It needs work," Isaiah admitted as he guided the wagon down the slope toward the house. "The roof needs patching before winter and the barn door is hanging crooked, but it's solid and it's home." When they reached the house, Isaiah helped her down from the wagon, his hand steady on her waist. She felt the warmth of his touch through her thin dress and quickly stepped away, flustered by her reaction. Inside, the house was spacious and surprisingly comfortable, with a large main room dominated by a stone fireplace, a kitchen area with a cast iron stove, and two doors leading to what she assumed were bedrooms. Everything was covered in a fine layer of dust, and dirty dishes were stacked haphazardly near the wash basin, evidence of a man living alone without much concern for tidiness. "I know it's a mess," Isaiah said, sounding slightly embarrassed. "Like I said, I've been managing on my own since Emma left. The bedroom on the left would be yours. It has a lock on the inside of the door." He said the last part pointedly, and Beatrice appreciated his directness. She walked to the indicated door and pushed it open, revealing a small but clean room with a bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out over the mountains. It was simple, but it was more than she had in town. The work would involve cooking, cleaning, washing clothes, that sort of thing, Isaiah continued. "I'm usually out with the cattle most of the day, so you'd have the house to yourself. I keep to myself in the evenings, mostly just read or do paperwork. I don't drink and I don't have men over for cards or any of that." Beatrice turned to face him. "Why are you really doing this, Mr. Zimmerman? The truth." He met her gaze steadily. "The truth is, I saw someone who needed help and I was in a position to offer it. The truth is also that I do genuinely need a housekeeper, and you looked like someone who would do the work honestly. And maybe part of the truth is that I'm tired of being alone out here, and it would be nice to have another human being around to talk to at supper time." "Is that honest enough for you?" Despite herself, Beatrice smiled. "Yes, that's honest enough. So you'll take the position." She looked around the house again, imagining it clean and tidy, imagining meals cooked in that kitchen and evenings by the fire. She thought about the alternative, about returning to Leadville and her room above the laundry and the endless worry about where her next coins would come from. "I'll take it," she said. "On a trial basis. If either of us finds the arrangement isn't working, we can end it with a week's notice." Isaiah's face broke into a genuine smile that transformed his serious features, and Beatrice felt her heart skip unexpectedly. "That's more than fair. Thank you, Miss Gardner. You won't regret this, I promise." She hoped he was right. The first few days passed in a flurry of cleaning and organizing. Beatrice threw herself into the work with determination, scrubbing floors, washing windows, beating dust from the curtains, and restoring order to the chaos that had accumulated during Isaiah's months of bachelorhood. She found a surprising satisfaction in the work, in seeing the immediate results of her efforts. Isaiah was true to his word, spending most of his time out working the ranch and giving her space and privacy. In the evenings, he would return dusty and tired, wash up at the pump outside and join her for supper. Their conversation started out tentative and formal, but gradually became more comfortable. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" Isaiah asked one evening, savoring a stew she had made from venison he had brought in and vegetables from his neglected garden. "My mother," Beatrice said. "She was a wonderful cook. She used to say that food made with care could heal more than just hunger." "She was right," Isaiah said. "I haven't had a proper meal in months. I'm usually too tired to do more than fry some bacon or open a can of beans." "That's no way to live," Beatrice said, shaking her head. "A man needs proper nutrition, especially if he's working as hard as you do." "Well, I'm grateful you're here now." He paused, then added, "I wanted to thank you, Miss Gardner. You've made this place feel like a home again." The sincerity in his voice made Beatrice flush with pleasure. "You're welcome. And please, you can call me Beatrice. Miss Gardner sounds too formal when we're sharing a house." "Only if you call me Isaiah," he replied. Mr. Zimmerman makes me sound like my father, she smiled. All right then, Isaiah. As the weeks passed, Beatrice found herself settling into a rhythm that felt natural and right. She rose with the sun, prepared breakfast, spent her days tending to the house and garden, and had supper ready when Isaiah returned from his work. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire and talk, sharing stories from their pasts and their hopes for the future. She learned that Isaiah was quiet but thoughtful, with a dry sense of humor that emerged once he was comfortable. He told her about his struggles to build the ranch, about winters so harsh he had lost nearly half his herd, about the small victories that kept him going. She found herself sharing things she had never told anyone, about her father's gentle nature and poor judgment, about her dreams of having a family and a home of her own someday. One evening in late October, as the first snow began to fall outside, Isaiah looked up from the accounts he was reviewing and said, Beatrice, I want you to know that the trial period is more than over in my mind. I'd like you to stay on permanently if you're willing. Beatrice set down the shirt she was mending and met his eyes. I'd like that too. I'm happy here, Isaiah. Happier than I've been in a long time. Relief and something else, something warmer, flickered across his face. I'm glad. I've been dreading the thought of you deciding to leave. The admission hung in the air between them, weighted with implications neither was quite ready to explore. Beatrice felt her pulse quicken and quickly looked back down at her mending. But later that night, lying in her bed and listening to the wind howl outside her window, she allowed herself to acknowledge what had been growing in her heart for weeks now. She was falling in love with Isaiah Zimmerman. It was a terrifying and exhilarating realization, made more complicated by their living arrangement and the difference in their positions. He was her employer, she was his housekeeper. Getting emotionally involved was foolish and dangerous. Yet every morning when she saw his smile over breakfast, every evening when they sat together by the fire, every small kindness he showed her, her feelings grew deeper and stronger. She was not the only one struggling with changing emotions. Isaiah found himself thinking about Beatrice constantly, looking forward to coming back to the house, not just because of the comfort it provided, but because of her presence. He loved hearing her singing softly as she worked, loved the way she laughed at his jokes, loved the intelligence and strength he saw in her green eyes. He had not meant to fall in love with her. He had genuinely only intended to help someone who needed it, to fill a practical need in his household. But somewhere between the first meal she had cooked and the first time she had touched his hand reaching for the same book on the shelf, he had lost his heart completely. The problem was, he had no idea how to tell her. She was dependent on him for her livelihood and her home. Any declaration of his feelings might make her uncomfortable, or, worse, make her feel obligated to reciprocate whether she wanted to or not. The last thing Isaiah wanted was to take advantage of his position or make Beatrice feel trapped. So he kept his feelings locked away and tried to be content with just having her near, even as it became increasingly difficult to maintain the proper distance between employer and employee. Winter came early and hard to the Colorado mountains that year. By November, snow lay 3 feet deep around the ranch, and the temperatures plummeted so low that ice formed on the inside of the windows, despite the fires they kept burning. Isaiah worked from dawn to dusk, keeping the livestock fed and sheltered, often returning to the house so cold he could barely speak, until Beatrice wrapped him in blankets and pressed hot coffee into his frozen hands. "You're going to freeze to death out there," she scolded one particularly bitter evening, rubbing his hands between hers to restore circulation. "You need better gloves. These are falling apart. Can't afford new ones until spring when I can sell some cattle. Isaiah said through chattering teeth. Beatrice frowned but said nothing. That night, after Isaiah had gone to bed, she stayed up late by lamplight, unraveling an old wool sweater she had brought from Kansas and reknitting it into thick, warm gloves. Her fingers ached from the work, and her eyes burned from staring at the stitches in the dim light, but she persisted until she had created a pair that would protect his hands from the brutal cold. When she presented them to him at breakfast, Isaiah stared at them for a long moment without speaking. "Beatrice, you didn't have to do this," he finally said, his voice rough with emotion. "I know," she replied, "but I wanted to. You work so hard and I hate seeing you suffer." He looked up at her and the expression in his eyes made her breath catch. "Thank you," he said softly. "This is the kindest thing anyone has done for me in years." He tried on the gloves, and they fit perfectly. When he looked at her again, Beatrice saw something in his face that made her heart race, but before either could say anything more, a loud bellowing came from the barn. "One of the cows must be calving," Isaiah said, jumping to his feet. "In this weather, that's dangerous. I need to get out there." "I'll come with you," Beatrice said immediately. "Beatrice, it's freezing out there and it could take hours." "Then you'll need help," she said firmly, already reaching for her cloak. "I grew up on a farm, Isaiah. I know how to help with a difficult birth." They bundled up and fought their way through the snow to the barn, where indeed one of the cows was in distress. For the next 3 hours they worked together in the lantern light, Beatrice proving to be as capable and calm as she had claimed. When the calf finally arrived, healthy despite the difficult delivery, they were both exhausted and covered in blood and birthing fluids, but triumphant. "We make a good team," Isaiah said, grinning at her across the newborn calf. "Yes, we do," Beatrice agreed, smiling back. It was only when they were walking back to the house, helping each other through the deep snow, that Isaiah realized he still had his arm around her waist, and she was leaning into him for warmth and support. It felt natural, right, like they belonged together. At the door of the house, they paused. Snow clung to Beatrice's hair and eyelashes, making her look like something from a fairy tale. Isaiah reached up and gently brushed the flakes from her cheek, his touch lingering. "Beatrice," he said quietly, "I need to tell you something." She looked up at him, her green eyes wide and vulnerable in the moonlight reflecting off the snow. "Yes." But before he could continue, a gust of wind cut through them, so cold it was painful. The moment broke and they hurried inside, stamping their feet and shivering. "You should get out of those wet clothes," Isaiah said. "I'll build up the fire." Later, after they had both changed into dry clothing and were sitting by the now roaring fire, warming their hands around cups of hot tea, Isaiah tried again. "Beatrice, what I was trying to say earlier." "Isaiah, you don't have to say anything," she interrupted, looking nervous. "I know we have a professional arrangement and I don't want to make things awkward." "What if I want things to be awkward?" he asked. "What if I want them to be more than professional?" Her eyes flew to his face. "What do you mean?" Isaiah set down his cup and turned to face her fully. "I mean that I've fallen in love with you. I didn't plan it, and I know it complicates everything, but I can't keep pretending I only think of you as my housekeeper. You're the first thing I think about when I wake up and the last thing on my mind before I sleep. You've made this house a home, yes, but more than that, you've made my life worth living again." Beatrice stared at him, her teacup trembling in her hands. "Isaiah, You don't have to say anything," he said quickly. "I know I'm putting you in a difficult position. If you don't feel the same way, I promise nothing will change. You'll still have your job and your home here, and I'll never mention this again. I just needed to be honest with you." "Isaiah, stop talking," Beatrice said, setting down her cup. "I'm trying to tell you that I love you too." The words hung in the air between them, crystalline and perfect. Isaiah felt his heart leap. You do? Of course I do, Beatrice said, her eyes bright with tears. How could I not? You saved my life that day in Leadville. You gave me shelter and work and respect when I had nothing. But more than that, you've shown me kindness and patience and friendship. You make me laugh. You make me feel safe. You make me feel like I matter. Isaiah crossed the small space between them and took her hands in his. You do matter. You matter more than anything. But what does this mean? Beatrice asked, her voice trembling. What do we do now? I know what I want to do, Isaiah said. I want to marry you, Beatrice. I want to build a life with you, a real partnership, but I won't rush you or pressure you. We can take as much time as you need. Beatrice laughed, a sound of pure joy. Isaiah Zimmerman, I've been living in your house for 3 months now. I think we've had enough time to know our own hearts. Yes, I'll marry you. Isaiah pulled her into his arms, holding her close and breathing in the scent of her hair. I promise I'll spend every day for the rest of my life making you happy, he whispered. You already do, she whispered back. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony in Leadville, with Mrs. Henderson and the general store owner as witnesses. Beatrice wore a dress that Isaiah had bought for her, a beautiful green silk that matched her eyes, and she carried a bouquet of dried flowers, the last remnants of the summer blooms she had been selling the day they met. The wedding night was awkward and sweet, both of them nervous despite their feelings for each other. But Isaiah was gentle and patient, and Beatrice was brave, and they found their way together, learning each other's bodies as they had already learned each other's hearts. The winter continued harsh and unforgiving, but they weathered it together, two people who had found in each other a refuge against the hardships of frontier life. They worked side by side, caring for the ranch and the animals, planning for the future. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, Beatrice often reading aloud while Isaiah worked on tack or accounts. Sometimes they would simply talk, sharing dreams and fears and memories. Other times they would sit in comfortable silence, content just to be near each other. I've been thinking, Isaiah said one February night as they lay together in bed, listening to the wind howl outside. When spring comes, I'd like to expand the herd. If we can increase our numbers before the summer markets, we could make enough to really secure our future. That sounds wise, Beatrice agreed, snuggled against his warmth. We'll need to repair the south pasture fence first. I noticed it was sagging when I was out gathering eggs. Isaiah smiled in the darkness. You notice everything. I don't know what I did before you were here. You survived, Beatrice said, but I like to think we're both thriving now. We are, Isaiah agreed, pressing a kiss to her forehead. We absolutely are. Spring came eventually, as it always does, melting the snow and revealing the brown earth beneath. The ranch came alive with new growth and new life. Calves were born, the garden was planted, and Beatrice and Isaiah worked together to repair fences and buildings damaged by the harsh winter. In May, Beatrice realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, noticing the changes in her body with a mixture of wonder and trepidation. When she finally told Isaiah, he picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure joy. A baby, he said, setting her down gently. We're going to have a baby. Are you happy? Beatrice asked, suddenly nervous. Happy, Beatrice, I'm more than happy. I'm blessed beyond measure. He placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. We're going to be a family. Tears spilled down Beatrice's cheeks. A family, she repeated. I never thought I'd have that again. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer months. As Beatrice's belly grew, Isaiah became increasingly protective, trying to prevent her from doing any heavy work. Beatrice, stubborn and independent as always, resisted his attempts to coddle her, insisting she was perfectly capable of continuing her normal activities. "I'm pregnant, not an invalid," she told him one day when he tried to stop her from hanging laundry. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time while still managing their daily work." "I know," Isaiah said, "but those women weren't carrying my child, and I love you too much to risk anything happening to you." His words softened her irritation. "Nothing is going to happen to me. I'm strong and healthy, but I promise I'll be careful and ask for help if I need it." They compromised, with Beatrice doing lighter work while Isaiah took on more of the physically demanding tasks. In the evenings, he would rest his head against her belly, talking to the baby and marveling at the small kicks and movements he could feel. "I think it's a boy," Isaiah said one night. "You think or you hope?" Beatrice asked, running her fingers through his hair. "Does it matter?" "I'll love any child we have." "It doesn't matter," Beatrice agreed, "but I think it's a boy too." Their son was born on a cold January night in 1881, arriving in the middle of a snowstorm that prevented them from getting to town for the doctor. Isaiah delivered the baby himself, with Beatrice's guidance and courage carrying them through. When he placed the squalling infant in her arms, both of them were crying, overwhelmed by the miracle of this new life they had created. "He's perfect," Beatrice whispered, counting tiny fingers and toes. "Absolutely perfect. What should we name him?" Isaiah asked, sitting beside her on the bed and wrapping his arm around both his wife and child. "I'd like to name him after your father," Beatrice said, "if that's all right with you." Isaiah's eyes filled with tears. "My father's name was James." "James Zimmerman. It's a strong name." "James Zimmerman," Beatrice repeated, looking down at her son. "Welcome to the world, little James." Parenthood transformed their lives in ways both exhausting and exhilarating. The ranch work continued, now complicated by the presence of an infant who needed constant care. But they managed, taking turns with night feedings and figuring out how to balance their responsibilities. Beatrice was a natural mother, patient and loving, but also practical and firm when needed. Isaiah discovered reserves of tenderness he had not known he possessed, spending hours just watching his son sleep, or carrying the baby against his chest in a sling Beatrice had made while he did lighter ranch work. "He's growing so fast," Beatrice observed one spring morning when James was 4 months old. "It seems like just yesterday we were bringing him into the world." "Time moves differently now," Isaiah agreed. "The days are long but the months are short." As James grew from infant to toddler, the ranch prospered. Isaiah's gamble on expanding the herd had paid off, and they were finally making enough money to not just survive but to save for the future. They added 2 rooms to the house, expanded the barn, and bought more land for grazing. Beatrice still kept a small flower garden behind the house, tending it in the early mornings before the heat of the day. Sometimes Isaiah would come upon her there, her hands in the soil, and remember the day he had first seen her in Leadville, desperate and alone, selling flowers to survive. The transformation in both their lives still amazed him. "What are you thinking about?" Beatrice asked one morning, noticing him watching her from the porch. "How lucky I am," Isaiah replied honestly. "How different my life might have been if I hadn't ridden into town that day." Beatrice stood and brushed the dirt from her hands, walking over to join him. "I think about that too. I think about how close I came to giving up entirely and how one act of kindness changed everything." "It wasn't just kindness," Isaiah said, pulling her into his arms. "It was fate. We were meant to find each other." Their lives fell into a rhythm that was busy but fulfilling. The ranch continued to grow, and 3 years after James was born, Beatrice delivered a daughter they named Clara, who had her mother's green eyes and her father's dark hair. 2 years after that came another son, Thomas, who was stubborn and determined from his first breath. The house that had once seemed too large for one lonely man now rang with the sounds of children playing and laughing. Meals around the table were chaotic and noisy, filled with the small dramas of childhood and the deeper discussions of parents trying to guide their children well. "Papa, can I help with the horses today?" James asked one morning when he was 8 years old. "If your mother can spare you from your lessons," Isaiah replied, looking to Beatrice for confirmation. "He's been working hard all morning," Beatrice said. "I think an afternoon with the horses would be fine." Isaiah ruffled his son's hair. "Then yes, you can help. But you have to follow my instructions exactly, understand? Horses can be dangerous if you're not careful." "I understand," James said solemnly. Watching them walk together toward the barn, Beatrice felt her heart swell with contentment. This life, this family, this home they had built together from nothing but determination and love was more than she had ever dared to dream of during those desperate days in Leadville. "Mama, can I pick flowers for the table?" Clara asked, tugging on her skirt. "Of course, sweetheart. The columbine should be blooming by the creek." As Clara ran off and baby Thomas played at her feet, Beatrice took a moment to simply breathe and appreciate the fullness of her life. She thought about the woman she had been, selling flowers on a dirty street corner, wondering if she would be able to afford dinner that night. She thought about the courage it had taken to accept Isaiah's offer, to trust a stranger and take a chance on something unknown. That evening, after the children were in bed and the house was quiet, Beatrice and Isaiah sat together on the porch, watching the sun set over the mountains. These were Beatrice's favorite moments, when the work was done and it was just the two of them, connected by years of shared struggles and joys. "I was thinking," Isaiah said, breaking the comfortable silence. "Maybe this fall we could take a trip to town, all of us together. Let the children see more of the world than just the ranch." "I'd like that," Beatrice agreed. "They should know there's more to life than these mountains, much as I love them." "You ever regret it?" Isaiah asked suddenly. "Staying here, living this isolated life?" "You could have found work in a city, had an easier life." Beatrice turned to look at him, taking his weathered hand in hers. "Isaiah Zimmerman, not a single day of my life have I regretted saying yes to you. This life is exactly what I wanted, even when I didn't know it was what I was looking for. You and our children and this ranch are everything to me." Isaiah lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "I love you, Beatrice, more with each passing year." "And I love you," she replied. "Always." The years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the growing children. James grew tall and strong, taking on more responsibility around the ranch and showing a natural talent for handling livestock. Clara was bright and curious, constantly asking questions about everything she saw and showing an artistic bent that Beatrice encouraged. Thomas was the adventurous one, always getting into scrapes and keeping his parents on their toes. When Beatrice turned 30, Isaiah surprised her with a party, inviting neighbors from surrounding ranches and friends from town. It was a rare social occasion, and Beatrice found herself overwhelmed by the number of people who came to celebrate with them, evidence of the reputation they had built in the community as hard-working, honest folks. Mrs. Henderson, now quite elderly, made the trip from Leadville with her daughter's help. When she hugged Beatrice, she whispered, "I knew that young man was one of the good ones. Look at the life you've built together." "I think about that day sometimes," Beatrice said. "When I was selling flowers and thought I had reached the end of my rope, if Isaiah hadn't come along when he did." "But he did," Mrs. Henderson interrupted gently. "That's what matters. He saw someone who needed help and he offered it without expecting anything in return. And you were brave enough to accept. That combination of kindness and courage is what built all of this. Later that night, after the guests had left and the children were asleep, Isaiah gave Beatrice her real present. It was a small painting, commissioned from an artist in Denver, showing the view from their porch at sunset with the mountains in the background. But in the foreground, barely visible, was the image of a woman selling flowers on a street corner and a man on horseback approaching her. "So we never forget where we started," Isaiah said as Beatrice stared at the painting with tears streaming down her face. "How could I ever forget?" Beatrice whispered. "That was the day my life began." As their children grew older and the ranch prospered further, Beatrice and Isaiah became pillars of their community. They helped neighbors in times of trouble, offering food during hard winters and assistance during calving season or harvest. They opened their home to travelers who needed shelter and gave work to drifters who needed a fresh start. "Why do you do so much for other people?" James asked his father one day when he was 12, watching Isaiah give a month's supply of beef to a family whose cabin had burned down. "Because someone once did the same for us," Isaiah replied. "Your mother and I both know what it's like to be desperate and alone. If we can ease that burden for someone else, it's our duty to do so." The lessons of compassion and generosity took root in their children, who grew up understanding that strength meant using what you had to help others, not just to accumulate more for yourself. In 1891, when Beatrice was 32 and Isaiah was 37, Colorado achieved statehood after years of territorial status. They made the trip to town to celebrate, joining the festivities with their children and marveling at how much had changed since those early days when Leadville was nothing but a rough mining camp. "Look at how far everything has come," Beatrice said, watching a proper schoolhouse being built on what had once been a muddy gambling hall. "This place is becoming civilized." "Some things are better," Isaiah agreed, "but I'm glad we have our ranch to escape to." "I'm not sure I'd want to live in town even now." "Neither would I," Beatrice said. "The mountains are home now." When James turned 16, he asked his father if he could start running part of the ranch operations himself. Isaiah agreed, proud of his son's initiative and capability. Together they expanded into horse breeding, taking advantage of James's natural talent with the animals. Clara, at 14, showed no interest in ranch work but had developed a passion for teaching. She began holding lessons for younger children on neighboring ranches, riding out twice a week with books in her saddlebags and patience in her heart. Thomas, at 12, was still trying to figure out his path, but he showed an aptitude for building and fixing things, spending hours in the workshop Isaiah had built behind the barn. "Our children are finding their own ways," Beatrice observed one evening. "That's a good thing, even if it means they'll probably leave eventually." Isaiah nodded, though the thought of his children leaving pained him. "We've given them strong foundations. When they do leave, they'll be ready." But leaving was still years away. For now, the family remained together, working and living and loving on their ranch in the Colorado mountains. The winter of 1893 brought another harsh season, and with it, a test of everything Beatrice and Isaiah had built. A late October blizzard caught them unprepared, stranding several head of cattle in the high pastures. Isaiah and James rode out to bring them down, promising to be back by nightfall. When darkness fell and they had not returned, Beatrice began to worry. By midnight, with the wind howling and the snow falling so thick she could barely see the barn from the house window, her worry had turned to fear. "Mama, where are Papa and James?" Clara asked, her face pale. "They're probably sheltering somewhere until the storm passes," Beatrice said, trying to sound calm despite the terror gripping her heart. "They know these mountains well. They'll be all right. But as the night wore on and the storm intensified, Beatrice found it harder and harder to maintain her composure. She kept the fire burning high, a beacon if they could see it, and heated soup that might have gone cold a dozen times. At dawn, the storm finally began to break. The moment there was enough light to see, Beatrice bundled up, preparing to go searching. "Mama, you can't go out in this," Clara protested. "I have to," Beatrice said firmly. "They might be hurt and need help." But before she could leave, she heard the sound of horses approaching. She ran to the door and flung it open, and there were Isaiah and James, covered in snow and ice but alive. "Oh, thank God," Beatrice cried, pulling them both inside. "I was so worried. We had to shelter in a canyon overnight," Isaiah explained through chattering teeth. "Couldn't risk trying to come back in the dark in that storm. I'm sorry we worried you." "You're alive," Beatrice said, tears streaming down her face as she helped strip off their frozen outer layers. "That's all that matters." That night, after everyone had warmed up and eaten and the terror had faded, Isaiah held Beatrice close in their bed. "When we were out there in the storm," he said quietly, "all I could think about was you, about making it back to you. You're still the reason for everything, Beatrice. Everything I do, everything I am, it's all because of you. We built this life together," Beatrice reminded him. "You're not alone in that canyon anymore, and I'm not alone on that street corner. We have each other and we have our family." "I know," Isaiah said. "And I'm grateful for it every single day." As the years rolled on, the ranch continued to thrive, and their children grew into capable young adults. James married a neighboring rancher's daughter when he was 21, a sweet girl named Mary who fit seamlessly into their family. They built a cabin on the far edge of the ranch property, starting their own branch of the Zimmerman legacy. Clara took a position as a teacher in Leadville when she was 18, living in town during the week, but coming home on weekends. Thomas showed interest in joining the expanding railroad industry, talking about opportunities in Denver. "They're leaving us," Isaiah said one night, sounding melancholy. "They're becoming themselves," Beatrice corrected gently. "That's what we raised them to do. Besides, James is staying. We'll have grandchildren running around soon enough." She was right. Less than a year after James's marriage, Mary gave birth to a daughter, making Beatrice and Isaiah grandparents at 40 and 46 respectively. Holding that tiny baby girl, Beatrice felt the circle of life turning, felt the continuity of family and love stretching forward into the future. "She looks like you," Isaiah observed, peering at his granddaughter. "She looks like herself," Beatrice said, but she was pleased by the comparison. More grandchildren followed over the years. Clara married a doctor she met in Leadville and had 3 children in quick succession. Thomas did go to work for the railroad, but met a girl in Denver and brought her home to meet the family before their wedding. Even he eventually returned to Colorado, settling in Colorado Springs, but visiting the ranch regularly with his growing family. As Beatrice approached 45, she sometimes felt tired in a way she never had before. The work of the ranch, which had once seemed manageable, now sometimes felt overwhelming. But she pushed through, determined to maintain the home and life they had built. One day, working in her garden, she felt a sharp pain in her chest that took her breath away. She sat down heavily, pressing her hand against her ribs and breathing carefully until it passed. She told no one, dismissing it as simple exhaustion, but the pains continued, growing more frequent. Finally, Isaiah noticed her wincing one evening and insisted she see the doctor when Clara came for her next visit. The doctor's diagnosis was serious but not immediately dire. Her heart was weakening, likely from the years of hard work and the altitude of the mountains. He prescribed rest and limited activity, which Beatrice resisted fiercely. I can't just sit around doing nothing, she protested to Isaiah. You're not doing nothing. You're taking care of yourself so you can be around for many more years, Isaiah replied firmly. Please, Beatrice. I can't lose you. I won't lose you. His desperation convinced her where logic had not. She reluctantly cut back on her activities, allowing their daughters-in-law to help with the housework and spending more time resting. The adjustment was difficult for someone as active as Beatrice had always been, but she found new rhythms. She spent hours with her grandchildren, telling them stories and teaching them to read. She tended her flower garden in short bursts, sitting on a stool Isaiah had made for her. She watched sunsets from the porch and counted her blessings. I've had a good life, she said to Isaiah one evening, her head resting on his shoulder. Whatever happens, I want you to know that. Don't talk like that, Isaiah said roughly. You're going to be fine. We're going to have many more years together. And they did. With proper care and medication from the doctor, Beatrice stabilized. She never regained her full strength, but she adapted, finding joy in a quieter life. In 1905, on their 25th wedding anniversary, Isaiah organized another party. This one was even larger than the one for Beatrice's 30th birthday, with children and grandchildren and friends from all over the region coming to celebrate. 25 years, Beatrice marveled, looking around at the crowd of people. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like forever. Best decision I ever made buying those flowers from you, Isaiah said, pulling her close for a dance even though there was no music playing. Best decision I ever made, trusting you enough to come see your ranch, Beatrice replied. They swayed together slowly, and for a moment they were not a middle-aged couple surrounded by their progeny and friends. They were a desperate flower seller and a compassionate cowboy, taking a chance on each other, building something beautiful from nothing but hope and love. The party lasted until well after dark, with food and laughter and storytelling. The grandchildren played games on the lawn while the adults reminisced. James gave a toast to his parents that left barely a dry eye in the crowd. My father once told me that he and Mama helped people because someone had once helped them, James said, raising his glass. But I think it goes deeper than that. They help people because they understand what it's like to struggle, and they believe in the fundamental goodness of offering a hand up rather than looking down. They taught us that love means action, not just words. That family is what you build, not just what you're born into, and that a life well lived is measured not in dollars earned or land owned, but in hearts touched and lives changed. To Isaiah and Beatrice Zimmerman. To Isaiah and Beatrice, the crowd echoed, drinking deeply. Later, when everyone had gone home and it was just the two of them again, Beatrice and Isaiah sat on their porch as they had done thousands of times before. You remember what you said to me that first day? Beatrice asked. When you bought all my flowers. I asked you to come see the ranch, Isaiah replied. No, before that. You said I didn't belong in Leadville. You were right, but not for the reasons you thought. I didn't belong there because I belonged here with you, even though neither of us knew it yet. Isaiah took her hand and kissed it gently. I think part of me did know. Why else would I have done something so impulsive? I'd ridden through Leadville a dozen times before and never stopped to buy flowers from any of the street vendors, but something about you called to me. Maybe it was fate, maybe it was God's plan, maybe it was just dumb luck. But whatever it was, I'm grateful for it. Me too, Beatrice whispered. Every single day, me too. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars came out one by one, blanketing the sky with light. Somewhere in the barn, a horse whinnied softly. A cool breeze carried the scent of Beatrice's flowers from the garden. An owl hooted in the distance. What are you thinking about? Isaiah asked. Everything, Beatrice said. All of it. The whole journey from that street corner to this porch. Every struggle, every triumph, every moment of joy and sorrow, it's all been worth it. It has, Isaiah agreed. And we're not done yet. We have years ahead of us still. I hope so, Beatrice said. There's so much more I want to see, grandchildren growing up, maybe even great-grandchildren. The ranch passing to James and his sons. Clara's children becoming teachers like her. Thomas's railroad career taking off. We'll see all of it, Isaiah promised. Together like we've done everything else. And they did see much of it. Beatrice lived another 10 years, long enough to meet 3 great-grandchildren and see the ranch expand to include over 1,000 acres. Her heart never fully recovered, but she managed it with grace and determination, refusing to let it define her final years. She spent those years doing exactly what she wanted, focusing on the relationships that mattered most. She taught her grandchildren to appreciate flowers and growing things. She wrote long letters to Clara, dispensing advice and encouragement. She sat with Isaiah in the evenings, holding his hand and talking about everything and nothing. When she finally passed away peacefully in her sleep in 1915 at the age of 56, the entire community mourned. The funeral was one of the largest ever held in Leadville, with people traveling from all over Colorado to pay their respects to a woman who had touched countless lives with her kindness and strength. Isaiah was devastated by her loss, walking through the house like a ghost for weeks afterward, unable to accept that she was truly gone. But eventually, with the help of his children and grandchildren, he began to heal, understanding that Beatrice would want him to continue living fully, not just existing in grief. He remained on the ranch for another 8 years, working alongside James and watching with pride as his son took over more and more of the operations. He told his grandchildren stories about their grandmother, keeping her memory alive. He tended her flower garden religiously, refusing to let it die. On what would have been their 40th anniversary, Isaiah sat on the porch alone, looking out at the mountains and thinking about all they had shared. He pulled from his pocket a dried flower, one of the columbine blossoms from the bouquet Beatrice had been selling the day they met. He had kept it all these years, pressed between the pages of his Bible. "Thank you," he whispered to her memory, "for saying yes, for trusting me, for loving me, for giving me a life worth living. I'll see you again soon, my love." He passed away peacefully a few months later, at 71, sitting in his favorite chair on the porch with Beatrice's flower still clutched in his hand. The family found a letter he had written to be read after his death, addressed to all his children and grandchildren. James read it aloud at the funeral, his voice breaking with emotion. "My beloved family, if you are reading this, I have gone to join your mother and grandmother, and I ask you not to mourn too deeply for me. I lived a long and blessed life, far beyond anything I dreamed possible in my younger years. I found love when I was least expecting it, and that love sustained me through every hardship and enriched every joy. Your mother taught me that true wealth is not measured in cattle or land or gold, but in the relationships we build and the love we share. She showed me that offering help without expectation of return is the highest calling, and that accepting help when you need it is not weakness but wisdom. The ranch will pass to James as we always planned, but my real legacy is all of you. Love each other. Help each other. Be kind to strangers, for you never know when you might be offering a hand to someone at their lowest point, someone who might become the most important person in your life. And remember, always remember, that the smallest acts of compassion can change everything. A man buying flowers from a desperate woman. A woman trusting a stranger enough to take a chance. That's all it took to build this entire family, this entire life. Never underestimate the power of kindness. With all my love, now and forever. Isaiah Zimmerman. There was not a dry eye in the church when James finished reading. The story of how Isaiah and Beatrice had met had been told and retold over the years, becoming the foundational myth of their family. But hearing it in Isaiah's own words, written at the end of his life, gave it new weight and meaning. The ranch continued to thrive under James's management and eventually passed to his sons, who passed it to their children in turn. Beatrice's flower garden remained a permanent fixture, tended by generation after generation of Zimmerman women. The house was added onto and modernized over the years, but the original rooms where Isaiah and Beatrice had lived and loved were preserved as a kind of shrine to the couple who had built everything. The painting Isaiah had commissioned for Beatrice's 30th birthday hung in the main room, and every child born into the family learned the story it represented. The story of a woman selling flowers to survive, and a cowboy who bought them all and asked her to stay. The story of two lonely people finding each other against all odds and building a life, a family, and a legacy that would endure for generations. In the years that followed, the story took on mythical proportions within the family and the wider community. Isaiah and Beatrice became symbols of what love and determination could accomplish, proof that kindness could change lives, and that taking chances on people was always worth the risk. Historians writing about the settlement of Colorado would sometimes mention the Zimmerman Ranch as an example of successful homesteading and sustainable ranching practices. But the family knew the real story was not about land or cattle or even survival against the harsh frontier. It was about two people who looked past their circumstances and saw something worth fighting for in each other. It was about the choice to help when you could simply walk away. It was about the courage to accept help when pride might have prevented it. It was about love growing in the most unlikely soil and blooming into something beautiful that would last far beyond one lifetime. The flower garden that Beatrice had first planted still bloomed every spring, filling the mountain air with fragrance and color. Columbine and Indian paintbrush and wild roses, the same flowers she had gathered to sell in Leadville all those years ago, growing now in cultivated beds, but still wild at heart. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun was setting over the mountains and the breeze was just right, those who lived on the ranch swore they could feel the presence of the couple who had built it all. Isaiah and Beatrice, forever bound together, forever watching over the family and the home they had created from nothing but a chance encounter and the decision to take a leap of faith. Their love story became the standard by which all others in the family were measured. When young people were contemplating marriage, grandparents would tell them about Isaiah buying all of Beatrice's flowers and asking her to stay. When someone was struggling to take a risk, parents would remind them of Beatrice trusting Isaiah enough to go with him to an isolated ranch. When families faced hardship, they would recall how Isaiah and Beatrice had weathered every storm together, their love growing stronger with each challenge overcome. The story taught that real love was not just about grand romantic gestures or passionate declarations. It was about seeing someone truly, recognizing their worth when they were at their lowest, and offering them not just help but partnership. It was about working side by side through long, hard days and still finding joy in each other's company at night. It was about building something together that was greater than the sum of its parts, something that would outlast both of you and bless generations yet to come. And so the legacy lived on, not just in the ranch or the land or the financial security Isaiah and Beatrice had worked so hard to achieve, but in the values they had embodied and the love they had shared. Their story reminded everyone who heard it that no matter how desperate your circumstances, No matter how alone you feel, redemption and love and hope are always possible. All it takes is one person willing to extend a hand and another person brave enough to take it. Everything else, all the beauty and joy and fulfillment that can fill a life, flows from that one simple choice to connect with another human being and see where the path might lead. Isaiah Zimmerman had been right when he told Beatrice on their 25th anniversary that buying her flowers was the best decision he ever made. But Beatrice had been equally right that trusting him enough to see his ranch had been her best decision. Because the truth was, their love story was not about one person saving another. It was about two people saving each other, two people building something together that neither could have created alone. That was the real magic of their story, the part that resonated across generations and inspired countless others to take chances on love and kindness, and the fundamental goodness of human connection. Not that a man had rescued a woman, but that two people had found each other in their mutual need and created something transcendent. The flowers that Beatrice had once sold to survive became a symbol of that truth. Beautiful but fragile things that bloom for a season and then fade, but whose seeds promise renewal and rebirth. Just as Beatrice's desperate flower selling had seemed like an ending but was actually a beginning, just as Isaiah's lonely life on the ranch had seemed sufficient until he realized how much he was missing, just as every ending contains the seed of a new beginning if we are brave enough to see it and nurture it. And so, more than a century after that fateful day in Leadville when a cowboy bought all the flowers and asked the seller to stay, the story lived on. It was told at weddings and anniversaries. It was invoked at births and funerals. It was whispered to children at bedtime and pondered by adults in moments of decision. Because ultimately, it was not just Isaiah and Beatrice's story. It was everyone's story, a reminder of what is possible when we choose compassion over indifference, connection over isolation, hope over despair. It was proof that love can grow anywhere, even in the harsh soil of the frontier, even between two strangers with nothing but need and the courage to acknowledge it. The ranch remained in the family, passing through the generations as Isaiah had intended, a living monument to what two people had built from almost nothing. And every spring, without fail, the flowers bloomed in Beatrice's garden, bright and beautiful and wild, a permanent reminder that from the smallest seed, the greatest blessings can grow.